On 1st February, the cover of the weekly The Economist issue had a picture of red tape and the title, The Revolt Against Regulation. Some statistics from the article stood the topic. In the United States, federal regulations now exceed 180,000 pages, up from 20,000 in the early 1960s. In the past 5 years, the European Parliament has enacted more than twice as many laws as America. Red tape costs the French economy close to 4% of GDP every year, and the OECD estimates that compliance costs eat up around 4% of business output in member countries on average. Obviously, a change is needed, but it might be a very long and not necessarily successful process. For example, in 2010, Britain set up an Office of Tax Simplification, which stood by helplessly as the tax code expanded. In 2023, the government decided to abolish not all its Byzantine tax rules, but the OTS itself. Is there another way to solve the problem? Shouldn't we look at the technology? So, thank you, Vincent, for taking time to share your thoughts on the topic, as well as thank you for your excellent presentation at the Norm Engineering Conference in Amsterdam in January. What do you think? Do we need to revolt against regulation? Or maybe this is the price to pay for a more safe and secure and greener environment?
Yeah, at the first glance, a revolt might be a good instrument to turn over society and get rid of all regulation, necessary or unnecessary. But on the other hand, as the well-known law philosopher John Locke described in his second treatise of government, we will have the need for established law in a civil society. So soon enough, such a ruleless society will find out it needs regulations just to govern behavior. Because people live together in a society, regulation is needed to protect both the values of that society and its individuals in all kinds of relations they have in society. However, as society gets more complex, its challenges get also more complex. Also, the number of people and the diversity of people under society's ruling grows and grows. So it's only logical that also the law that governs society grows and also gets more complex. So indeed, I'm afraid that is the price that we have to pay. But of course, we like to get good value for our money. And that means that also in rulemaking, efficiency by constant evaluation between rulemakers and rule implementation is needed to prevent unnecessary or implementable or even unenforceable legislation.
Yes, indeed, the implementation. While presenting at the conference, you emphasized that there is a big gap between legislation and implementation. Could you explain, what do you think, why did it happen?
Well, why did it happen? We do not have the needed efficiency in the process from law to implementation. The gap between legislation and implementation is precisely the source of that. Rulemaking and rule implementation are now two complete different and isolated steps in the whole chain from law to implementation. That's the principle of separation of powers, the trias politica, demands that lawmaking and law execution should be separated. And together with adjudication as the third power, the system will be in a controlled balance. But that separation should not mean that the powers should not cooperate in bringing benefits to society. But in practice, the gap between lawmakers and implementation we see is very big. Very often laws are written and done, while implementation doesn't even start to think about the topic. And when implementation starts, then we see that lawmakers are already busy with other topics and other legislation and simply do not have the time to help implementers. So that is basically the problem that we face nowadays.
It is a huge problem indeed. And what is the most effective way to bridge that gap, in your opinion, and in general, to make compliance less costly?
Yeah, it's a good question. And their cooperation and traceability are both key concepts. When lawmakers involve implementation in an early phase, preferably even at the time that laws are written, then the costs of regulation and the possibilities or even impossibilities of the execution of laws can be discussed in a cooperative setting where all the stakeholders in the process from law to execution are involved, and also speaking the same language and having the same understanding of the topic that they are dealing with. And that will give implementation direct insight in the meaning of laws and the possibility of direct feedback from implementation. And on the other hand, lawmakers will get an early insight in the enforceability and implementation impossibilities and can even make changes. So in other words, they can make better laws suited for implementation. The other key concept, the traceability, means that there is a direct link between implementation artifacts, think of system decisions, and legislation. And using that traceability helps to explain, for instance, why a decision is taken, on which legal grounds the decision is taken, and will help to enhance compliancy. But on the other hand, also, when the law changes, and by nature laws do change, also a direct impact assessment can be made on the effects of implementation, because you will know the connection between the law and the implementation. You just have to pull, for instance, the article, and then you see where the changes have to be made in a system or in a decision or in what kind of implementation that you have.
Yeah, it sounds solvable, but what needs to change to make it indeed happen? Or we need maybe a good crisis, which in fact is already upon us, as we see as the US increasingly pushed in the eye of the tornado geopolitically, militarily, technologically, and economically.
Yeah, I think indeed we have a lot of crises going on all kinds of levels, and we even see that the separation of powers we just mentioned seems to be in danger. But because we are in such uncertain times, we also might face even more regulation and even more dynamics. Think for instance about the ever-growing number of export control legislation, which is exploding by the month. So what we need is to stay in control and be able to show the effects of regulations and be able to say something about the enforceability in an early stage. So we can adapt and control legislation as we just saw with the previous question. And there we have a norm engineering, which is, there's a lot can be said about norm engineering, but for now, let's say it's a method to make regulations suitable for implementation, using standards and using structured methods. And that norm engineering can bring us just that by its concepts of cooperation and traceability. And also regarding the ever-growing amounts of regulation, also AI will give us new instruments to speed up the process of norm engineering and cope with the growing amount of regulation. Because it is norm engineering is it's a mental process. It's a profession. It's done by people. And people, they have their limitations. So that's why we see that AI can help people in performing the norm analysis and do speed up the whole process. And then working together in the chain from law to implementation with the help of norm engineering. It's also a new concept to many. Bringing people together that are not used to work together, lawyers and more technical people, IT people. That's not always that easy. So I think we need good examples to show that such a way of working will benefit us. And in the Netherlands, we have some good examples of how rules and implementation are linked, resulting in traceable and compliant and lawful systems. Where people from law and from IT and from communication work together using the same language to strive at the same goal. And for instance, under the new environmental law, we see that usage is made of machine readable texts where legal information objects directly coupled to the legal text and also directly made by the lawmakers themselves can directly be used in implementation processes without any analysis needed. So for instance, you can directly check on a map what activities are allowed or are not allowed just by using the legal text just by using that objects. So I think the norm engineering community should get legal people interested in that way of working and make them enthusiastic about that approach, so we can solve the gap together with all the stakeholders in the process, from law to implementation, well, to just cope with those tornadoes.
Thank you so much. That's very insightful. And also thank you for the practical example, which shows that it is possible indeed. And I hope to continue this conversation with you in the form of an article, because there are still many questions left. And for now, many thanks to you, Vincent.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you.